60 below. Once you get cold, you just can't warm back up. The consequences are worse out here just because it's
He was once the beating heart of a show that made the wilderness look like both a nightmare and a dream come true. A man who willingly traded suburban convenience for frostbitten mornings and solitude among wolves. And then, just like that, he disappeared. Marty Meierotto, a name synonymous with rugged independence and pure survival, built a reputation not in Hollywood but in the icy backwoods of Alaska, where frost creeps under your nails and every decision could be your last. Millions watched him navigate snowstorms, rebuild cabins by hand, and set traplines hundreds of miles from civilization, all without flinching. The History Channel's Mountain Men turned him into an unlikely celebrity, but behind the silent trapper persona was a man grappling with something much deeper. Why did Marty leave the show at its peak, walk away from fame, and retreat deeper into a life most people wouldn't survive a week in? The answer isn't simple. It involves a near-death experience in the sky, the loss of a dear friend, a storm of criticism from animal rights activists, and most importantly, a father's choice to put family above everything. This isn't just a story about a man who chose the wild, it's about the cost of that choice, the courage it takes to vanish when all eyes are watching, and the legacy left behind in the snow. As cameras faded and rumors swirled, the man they called Mountain Men's soul returned to a life without scripts or spotlights. But what truly happened in those final moments before Marty walked away, and what has he been doing since? Let's uncover the full story of a modern legend, a man of silence, survival, and surprising sacrifice. Long before the world ever heard his name, Marty Meierotto was already carving a path into the wilderness with nothing but a fierce spirit and an unwavering curiosity for the untamed. Born on July 10, 1966, in the icy reaches of northern Wisconsin, Marty wasn't raised on playgrounds and pavement. Instead, his earliest memories were formed under the frostbitten canopy of pine forests and beside the flickering glow of firewood-stoked cabins. His parents, Thomas and Karen Meierotto, weren't just ordinary Midwestern folks. They were stewards of an old tradition, passing down a family legacy rooted in the art of fur trapping. It was a life that demanded grit and offered no shortcuts, one that involved chasing animals most people would run from, not toward. Alongside his brothers Jeff and Steve, young Marty learned to navigate the kind of terrain that eats weaker souls alive, treacherous snowfields, biting winds, and the unpredictable behaviors of creatures far more instinctual than men. Even as a child, he showed signs of an unusual courage, reportedly fascinated with predators like wolves and wolverines, animals whose names alone would scare the average person. While others daydreamed about college or big city careers, Marty was already envisioning a different kind of future, one with no walls, no bosses, and no roads. So when the time came to choose between textbooks and traplines, he didn't hesitate. College wasn't in the cards. He turned instead toward the fading footprints of his ancestors, stepping into a trade that most modern men had long abandoned. But Wisconsin, for all its beauty, offered limited opportunities. Trapping had become fiercely competitive, and the wild game Marty sought was increasingly scarce. Frustrated but undeterred, he and his brother Jeff loaded up their gear in 1985 and set their sights on the last frontier, Alaska. What was supposed to be a short expedition in search of richer trapping grounds soon became a full-blown love affair with the wild. The brothers fell hard for Alaska's brutal charm, its bone-deep silence, and the promise of freedom that echoed through its frozen valleys. That decision, spontaneous and driven by instinct, would ultimately reshape the entire course of Marty's life. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by isolation, hardship, and a kind of personal fulfillment that can't be bought or broadcast. This was the genesis of the man fans would one day revere. Not a made-for-TV persona, but a living, breathing testament to what happens when you follow the wild instead of the crowd. When Marty Meierotto arrived in Alaska in 1985, it wasn't with fame in mind or even comfort. It was with a battered pickup truck, a few supplies, and a fire in his chest that couldn't be doused by cold or failure. He wasn't born into money, nor did he have a detailed plan. What he had was something far rarer: resolve. In Fairbanks, he scraped together a living through whatever honest work he could find, mopping floors as a janitor, hauling logs through frigid forests, and sweating on construction sites just to afford a basic trapping kit and a used tent. While many would see these jobs as dead ends, for Marty they were stepping stones toward a wilder destiny. Every spare moment away from work was spent laying traps and studying the land, tracking patterns and battling cold that cracked skin like glass. Marty wasn't just surviving, he was learning, building the skills that would one day make him one of the most respected trappers in the state. Eventually, he saved enough to quit his jobs and build a one-room log cabin deep in the backcountry, a simple structure just large enough to keep the cold at bay, but symbolic of something much larger, his total commitment to a life most couldn't even imagine. He began setting traplines hundreds of miles away from anything resembling civilization, venturing out on snowmobiles or foot in temperatures that plummeted to -40 Fahrenheit. There were no quick exits, no backup plans. Each day was a gamble, every trip a test of endurance. The work was grueling. He wasn't catching for sport or spectacle, but to survive, to build a future on the furs he could sell and the knowledge he could accumulate. As the years passed, Marty's operation grew from a solitary man with a few traps to an efficient wilderness venture. He constructed additional cabins along his extended traplines, spaced days apart, giving him shelter as he roamed vast stretches of frozen wilderness. For most people, such a life would seem brutal, even barbaric, but for Marty, it was beautiful. Friends back in town questioned his sanity. Why choose this life of cold and isolation when there were easier ways to earn a living? But they didn't understand what he saw each morning: the untouched beauty of a snow-covered ridge, the quiet stillness of an undisturbed forest, the sheer joy of tracking a wolverine and succeeding against all odds. Alaska had transformed him. What began as a temporary relocation had become a permanent way of life. Marty wasn't just trapping animals, he was trapping moments, building a life of meaning, stripped of distractions, governed only by nature's harsh but honest rules. His journey from janitor to full-time trapper wasn't just a career shift, it was the beginning of a transformation into something America would soon witness on their screens, a man who didn't just survive the wild but belonged to it. Marty Meierotto's story isn't just one of solitude and survival, it's also one of selfless service, often risking his life not just to trap fur, but to save forests and entire communities from nature's most violent force, fire. In 1988, before the world knew his name, Marty took his grit and relentless work ethic into one of the most elite and dangerous professions imaginable: wildland firefighting. He started out with the China Interagency Hotshots, a unit known for accepting only the toughest, most mentally and physically resilient individuals. Out of 8 candidates who began the brutal training process, only 4 crossed the finish line, and Marty was one of them. That accomplishment alone speaks volumes about the kind of man he was becoming: disciplined, fearless, and unstoppable under pressure. But he didn't stop there. By 1994, Marty had risen to the ranks of a smokejumper with the Alaska Fire Service, parachuting into active fire zones from aircraft to fight blazes that threatened remote towns, precious ecosystems, and sometimes even his own trapping grounds. He recorded an astonishing 337 jumps over the course of 114 fire responses, each one a testament to his courage and readiness to throw himself into danger for the greater good. Imagine strapping on a parachute and leaping into thick smoke, wind howling, flames licking the treetops below. This was Marty's summer job, a seasonal shift from trapping that allowed him not only to earn extra income, but to contribute to the protection of a land he had come to love with every fiber of his being. It also provided a crucial safety net for his growing family, supporting his wife Dominique and their daughter Noah while still allowing him to stay tethered to the wilderness. The duality of his life was something few could understand. One season he was crouched beside a frozen stream setting traps. The next he was descending through smoke-filled skies to dig fire lines and coordinate evacuations. Yet it all fit together for Marty, because both worlds required the same essential qualities: courage, preparation, and an unwavering connection to the land. He loved flying, not for the thrill but for the freedom it gave him, and being a smoke jumper allowed him to marry that love with a sense of purpose far beyond trapping. His knowledge of Alaska's unforgiving terrain, honed through years of backcountry living, made him an invaluable asset to firefighting teams, and he later took pride in training the next generation of smoke jumpers, men and women who would carry on the perilous but critical mission of combating wildfires in some of the most remote regions on Earth. Marty's firefighting career never made the headlines the way his television work would, but in many ways it was even more heroic. He didn't do it for recognition or drama, he did it because it needed to be done. Because when Alaska burned, it wasn't just trees and animals at risk, it was a way of life. For Marty Meierotto, jumping into fire was just another chapter in the epic story of a man who never stopped pushing himself to the limit, no matter the season, the terrain, or the odds. It was only a matter of time before someone took notice of Marty Meierotto's extraordinary life. A life that played out far from highways and headlines but captured the essence of raw, unfiltered survival in the modern age. The History Channel, always on the lookout for authentic stories of resilience and tradition, found in Marty something rare. A man not playing a character but simply being himself, deep in the Alaskan wilderness, doing what he'd always done without spectacle or pretension. Producers were drawn not just to the harsh environment Marty inhabited, but to the way he thrived within it, setting traps hundreds of miles from civilization, building cabins with his bare hands, and flying solo missions over snow-blanketed valleys to check his trap lines. When they first approached him with the idea of documenting his life, Marty was skeptical. He hadn't chosen this path for attention, and the concept of cameras following him into one of the most private and dangerous lifestyles in North America wasn't immediately appealing. But over time, he saw the value, not for ego or fame, but for education, for giving others a glimpse into a vanishing way of life that still demanded strength, skill, and humility. So in 2012, Mountain Men premiered, and with it, the world was introduced to a cast of rugged individuals, each with their own connection to the land. But among the ensemble, Marty stood out. His segments were quieter, less dramatized, but infinitely more real. Viewers saw a man who wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply surviving, building, hunting, and teaching. Marty's passion for the land, his respect for the animals he trapped, and his methodical approach to every challenge made him a standout favorite. He didn't need conflict or controversy to keep audiences interested. Instead, he offered something rare: authenticity. His decision to allow cameras into his world came with challenges. The logistics of filming in sub-zero conditions were extreme. Camera crews had to follow Marty through treacherous terrain, often unable to keep up with his grueling pace. He made no concessions for production. If the snowmobile needed to move, it moved. If it was too cold to speak, he stayed silent. That honesty became his brand. He wasn't just another face on reality TV. He was a teacher, a window into a world where instincts still mattered and nature dictated the rules. Fans connected with him because he wasn't flashy or attention-seeking. He was a man doing what he loved and letting others watch. As the show gained momentum, Marty's reputation grew beyond the trapping community. He became a symbol of resilience, a representation of what it meant to truly live off the land. Despite the increasing recognition, Marty remained grounded. He continued his trapping routes, rebuilt his cabins, and flew his plane, undistracted by fame or cameras. He wasn't interested in celebrity. If anything, the attention made him uncomfortable. Yet he endured it for one reason: the opportunity to preserve and pass down the values he held dear: independence, respect for nature, and the deep satisfaction of doing something hard every day without shortcuts. In a television landscape dominated by drama and manufactured conflict, Marty Meierotto brought something different, something real, and for that audiences didn't just watch, they listened, learned, and admired a man who lived the way most only dared to dream. As Mountain Men steadily climbed the ratings charts and found its place in the hearts of reality television fans around the world, it became clear that Marty Meierotto was more than just another cast member. He was the soul of the show. While other personalities brought excitement through confrontation or dramatic flair, Marty offered something deeper: quiet strength, raw authenticity, and a level of competence that made even the harshest conditions seem survivable. Viewers weren't just watching him out of curiosity, they were watching him because he represented a lifestyle few had the courage to attempt, let alone master. Week after week, millions tuned in not for scripted antics or flashy editing, but to watch a man rise before dawn in sub-zero temperatures, fire up his snowmobile, and head out alone across the vast Alaskan wilderness in search of fur. He didn't seek praise, yet it came in waves. Online forums, fan pages, and social media comment sections lit up with admiration for Marty, his integrity, his humility, and his ability to endure with grace. Among a cast of seasoned outdoorsmen like Eustace Conway in the Blue Ridge Mountains and Tom Orr in Montana's Yak River Valley, Marty stood out for his sheer independence. He rarely worked with others on screen. His was a one-man operation, and that solitude resonated with viewers who craved an escape from the noise and chaos of modern life. Marty's scenes weren't driven by conflict or crisis, but by a steady rhythm: chopping firewood, repairing a snowmobile, checking traps, and flying solo into the heart of nowhere. And in that simplicity, audiences found something profound. They saw a man who wasn't pretending, who didn't crave attention, and who stayed true to himself in a medium that so often rewards the opposite. His reputation wasn't just built on the show either. Long before Mountain Men, he had already earned respect in the trapping and firefighting communities for his years of dedication and expertise. The show simply gave that respect a broader stage. As his fame grew, so did the mythos around him. Viewers speculated about his daily routines, his survival techniques, and even his family life, which he kept mostly private. Fan admiration extended beyond passive viewing. Some sent letters, gifts, and messages of gratitude, saying his lifestyle had inspired them to reconnect with nature, take up homesteading, or simply slow down and live more intentionally. Despite the praise, Marty never let celebrity alter his path. He continued to live in his modest cabin, relied on his own two hands, and made sure every trap he set was done ethically and legally. He never leaned into the role of TV personality. If anything, he seemed slightly amused by the attention, but to his fans, that only deepened their affection. He wasn't just a reality star, he was proof that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's silent, steady, and unshakable. Marty Meierotto became the kind of hero television rarely produces anymore. A man defined not by what he said or how he performed, but by how he lived when no one was watching. And even as the show expanded its scope, introducing new cast members and storylines, Marty remained the benchmark, the one fans returned for, week after week, season after season. For a man as seasoned and calculated as Marty Meierotto, danger was a part of the daily equation, but not even decades of experience could fully prepare him for one of the most harrowing moments of his life, a near-fatal plane crash that unfolded not on national news, but quietly under the indifferent Alaskan sky, far from help or human contact. It was during one of his routine flights to check traplines that ran deep into Alaska's northern slope, near the Dranjik River, that the incident occurred, and it would go on to haunt both Marty and the viewers who later watched the aftermath unfold on Mountain Men in an episode appropriately titled Closet Call. Marty, piloting his trusty Super Cub outfitted with tundra tires, specifically designed to endure Alaska's frozen terrain, noticed his aircraft suddenly nosediving while descending into a remote zone. In that moment, the vast beauty of the wilderness turned into an unrelenting threat. With nerves of steel, Marty managed to stabilize the plane and execute a shaky but safe landing, but the relief was short-lived. The engine was compromised, temperatures were dropping rapidly, and he was stranded with no survival gear or means of contact. The remote location meant there were no roads, no cell signals, and no backup coming. The only shelter available was an old cabin he had constructed years earlier, now weather-beaten but still standing like a loyal friend amid the frost. Marty had no choice but to wait out the harsh Alaskan winter alone, relying on stored food, aged firewood, and the kind of mental discipline that only comes from a lifetime of living on the edge. During those months, the silence was deafening, the cold was merciless, and the nights were haunted by the howls of predators circling just beyond the firelight. But if there was one thing Marty knew how to do, it was survive. He rationed every bite, fortified his cabin with makeshift repairs, and even built a snowmobile by hand to give himself a better chance of escaping should another emergency arise. However, the homemade snow machine had its own flaws. It could only function when riding through at least 4 inches of snow, any less and the engine would overheat. Marty learned to scoop up handfuls of powdery snow and pack them against the heat exchanger, often while driving, just to prevent a breakdown. It was a slow, dangerous method, but it was all he had, and yet somehow he endured. What's even more staggering is that after finally emerging from that life-threatening ordeal, Marty didn't run from the wild. He returned to it. Not because he had something to prove, but because that's who he was, a man who didn't flinch in the face of death, who treated survival not as a stunt, but as a way of life. For fans watching from the safety of their living rooms, the scene was terrifying. But for Marty, it was another day in the life of someone who had long accepted that real living means being on the edge. Close calls were part of the job, and rather than retreat, he used them as lessons, silent teachers reminding him of nature's power. Despite his stoic demeanor and years of wilderness experience, Marty Meierotto was not immune to fear. Real, soul-rattling fear that creeps in during the darkest hours of an Alaskan night, or while staring down the paw print of something big enough to end you in seconds. Living alone in the wild wasn't just a lifestyle choice for Marty, it was a constant flirtation with danger, where the line between control and chaos was razor-thin. One of the most unsettling episodes of his outdoor journey occurred while hunting mountain goats on Alaska's infamous Kodiak Island, a place known for its breathtaking beauty, but also for being home to some of the largest and most aggressive brown bears in North America. Marty, who was always careful and prepared, had ventured deep into the island's rugged interior on foot when he spotted the unmistakable track of a bear, a print so massive it nearly dwarfed his boot. By his estimate, the animal was at least 9 feet long, a colossal predator capable of ending a human life in seconds. In that moment, Marty's instincts kicked in, and despite having a rifle slung over his shoulder, he knew that even a well-placed shot might not stop such a beast. "This is exactly what I didn't want to happen," he muttered, half to himself and half to the wind that suddenly seemed to carry more menace than chill. The presence of such a predator didn't just change the logistics of his hunt, it altered the psychological terrain. Every crack of a branch, every shifting shadow, became a potential threat. And this wasn't a one-time occurrence. Marty's entire career was riddled with moments that tested not only his survival skills, but also his mental endurance. He often spoke about the eerie silence of the forest right before a storm, the way a distant howl could trigger primal fears, or how getting stuck in a blizzard with no radio and no backup plan made you question your every decision. But perhaps nothing shook him more than the losses he experienced not at the claws of nature, but through the heartache of mortality. The passing of Preston Roberts, his fellow Mountain Men castmate and a legendary outdoorsman in his own right, hit Marty especially hard. Preston had been diagnosed with an inoperable tumor on his liver, and his body shut down swiftly and cruelly in 2017. Marty, who rarely showed emotion publicly, penned a heartfelt tribute to Preston, calling him one of the kindest men he had ever known, and crediting him with teaching valuable life lessons about generosity and community. The tragedy served as a stark reminder that no amount of survival skill could protect you from every threat life had to offer. In honor of his friend, Marty supported a fundraiser that raised over $110,000 to complete the new roof Preston had been building for his family before he passed. It wasn't the wild that broke Marty, it was the realization that even the strongest, most capable among us are vulnerable. Between predator encounters, mechanical failures, and the ever-present possibility of frostbite, injury, or simply disappearing into the woods with no one ever finding you, Marty lived with a level of risk that few can comprehend. Yet through all of it he remained grounded, not because he was fearless, but because he respected the fear. He understood its purpose, its warning signs, and the thin thread on which his life often dangled. The wilderness never gave Marty a day off, never offered guarantees, and never apologized, and that, paradoxically, is what kept him going. Because in those moments when most would break, Marty became sharper, more focused, and more determined than ever to live his truth in the face of death. While Marty Meierotto was revered by fans for his grit and authenticity, not everyone watching mountain men saw him as a hero. As his television profile rose and more people became exposed to the harsh realities of fur trapping, Marty found himself thrust into a firestorm of criticism from animal rights groups and environmental activists who condemned his methods and questioned the morality of his lifestyle. These groups accused him of unnecessary cruelty, arguing that in a modern world full of synthetic alternatives and grocery stores, there was no ethical justification for trapping wild animals, let alone showcasing it on national television. Social media campaigns labeled him as outdated, brutal, and insensitive to the suffering of wildlife, claiming that his traps caused undue pain and that the entire show glorified a lifestyle rooted in violence toward animals. Some demanded that History Channel cancel his segments, while others bombarded online forums with condemnation. For Marty, the criticism wasn't entirely unexpected. He knew that trapping, even when done legally and respectfully, was always going to rub certain viewers the wrong way. But what frustrated him was how little his critics understood about the reality on the ground in Alaska. In several interviews and rare public statements, he calmly defended his work, stating unequivocally that he didn't trap for pleasure or cruelty, but as part of a lifestyle rooted in sustainability, tradition, and survival. He emphasized that he followed all of Alaska's strict trapping regulations, used traps specifically designed to minimize suffering, and only targeted species that were legally approved and in season. Marty also highlighted the ecological role that trappers play in balancing predator populations and preventing overpopulation-related disease outbreaks. But for many of his detractors, these justifications fell flat. They insisted that no matter how regulated or selective the process, trapping was inherently violent and belonged to a bygone era. The debate grew so intense that even some viewers of Mountain Men began to question whether the show was presenting an honest picture or exaggerating events for dramatic effect. Marty's defenders, however, were just as passionate. Fans flooded message boards with stories about how his segments had inspired them to reconnect with nature, adopt more self-sufficient lifestyles, and even appreciate the ethics of sustainable hunting and trapping when compared to industrial agriculture. They pointed out that Marty never sensationalized his work. He didn't boast or take joy in animal suffering. In fact, his quiet demeanor and reverence for the land suggested a deep respect for every creature he pursued. Unlike poachers or trophy hunters, Marty's goal wasn't domination, it was coexistence, living with the land rather than exploiting it. The backlash never pushed Marty into hiding, but it certainly hardened his resolve to live privately and on his own terms. He didn't clap back at critics with rage or defensiveness. He simply continued doing what he'd always done, living responsibly, quietly, and with purpose. Still, the controversy illuminated the growing divide between urban viewers and the realities of rural survival, between sanitized opinions and the brutal decisions required when you live hundreds of miles from the nearest store or hospital. Marty became an accidental spokesperson for an older, more primal way of life, a way of life that wasn't pretty but was real. In the end, the criticism didn't define him, his choices did. And those choices, controversial or not, reflected a man who valued honesty over comfort, responsibility over popularity, and reality over appearances. For fans of Mountain Men, Marty Meierotto's sudden departure in 2019 was more than just a character leaving a show. It felt like a chapter closing in a story they had come to deeply admire. After 8 seasons of watching him brave unforgiving blizzards, fend off predators, and carve out a life of solitude and skill in the Alaskan wilderness, audiences were stunned when Marty announced he was stepping away from the series for good. No elaborate farewell, no dramatic send-off, just a heartfelt decision rooted in the one thing that mattered more to him than the land itself, his family. While many speculated that the reason behind his exit was tied to the physical toll of living in such an extreme environment, or the mounting pressure from public criticism, the truth was far more personal. Marty wanted to spend uninterrupted time with his then 13-year-old daughter, Noah Jane Meierotto, and his wife Dominique, He had long valued privacy and simplicity, and the increasing demands of television production had begun to infringe on the quiet moments he held sacred. Even though mountain men provided financial security and a global platform to share his lifestyle, it also brought with it a camera crew, scheduling constraints, and a sense of surveillance that clashed with his deeply held beliefs about solitude and family bonding. Marty wasn't just a man of the wild, he was a father first. He saw that Noah was growing up fast, learning the same skills he had learned decades earlier, and he didn't want her to grow up under the pressure of a lens or feel like their relationship was content for viewers. She had begun to assist with traplines, fly in the bush plane, and absorb the knowledge her father had acquired over years of trial and error, and Marty wanted those experiences to belong solely to them, not to a production schedule or an audience's expectations. On the show, he candidly explained that it was time to leave, not because he was tired of trapping or surviving in the wilderness, but because he didn't want his daughter's most formative years to be filtered through a reality show. It was an emotional choice, but one that resonated with many parents who understood the rarity and value of such intentional parenting. Dominique, who had left a more comfortable urban life to stand by Marty's side in the wild, supported his decision wholeheartedly. The family relocated to a quieter area in Alaska, where they continue to trap, live simply, and stay out of the public eye. For Marty, fame was never the goal. It was a side effect of doing something he loved with honesty and integrity. Leaving the show didn't mean leaving his identity. If anything, it reaffirmed it. He remained committed to teaching Noah everything he knew about survival, respect for nature, and self-reliance. Fans who missed his presence on television had to come to terms with the fact that Marty never signed up to be a celebrity. He allowed the world in only briefly to tell a story that was already decades in the making. His exit, graceful and unapologetic, reminded viewers that the truest form of strength sometimes lies in walking away, not in defeat, but in prioritizing what matters most. Marty Meierotto chose his family over fame, his peace over profit, and in doing so he reinforced exactly why so many people respected him in the first place. He didn't just live off the grid, he lived by his principles, and that's a legacy no television contract could ever define.
Marty Meierotto didn't just leave behind a successful television career, he left behind a legacy that speaks louder in silence than most do with words. In a world driven by noise, competition, and constant validation, Marty's journey stands as a quiet rebellion, a testament to the idea that true fulfillment is found not in recognition, but in living with purpose, grit, and an unwavering moral compass. At 59 years old, he has done what many dream of but few dare, lived on his own terms, conquered one of Earth's harshest landscapes, and raised a family not in the shadows of fame, but in the raw, unfiltered light of nature. His name may no longer appear in Mountain Men credits, but his influence is felt in every rerun, every online tribute, and every viewer who was inspired to rethink what it means to live a meaningful life. Marty was never chasing ratings, he was chasing the sound of the wind through Alaskan trees, the crackle of a fire in a hand-built cabin, the wide-eyed wonder in his daughter's gaze as she learned to read animal tracks in the snow. He flew his own planes, fought fires in the summer, built cabins in the winter, and weathered storms both literal and emotional that would break most men. And when the cameras left, when the public moved on to the next character, Marty didn't miss a step. He remained in the wilderness, teaching his daughter how to trap, how to fly, how to survive, not just physically, but spiritually, with values rooted in patience, self-reliance, and respect for the land. His decision to walk away at the height of his popularity wasn't an exit, it was an evolution, a final message to his viewers that the truest adventures aren't always the ones caught on film. Today, Marty Meierotto lives with his wife Dominique and daughter Noah in a remote part of Alaska, continuing the work that has defined his life. There are no producers scheduling his day, no retakes if things go wrong, just him, his snowmobile, his traps, and the same biting wind that welcomed him decades ago. For his fans, he remains more than just a television personality, he is a symbol of perseverance, an embodiment of authenticity in a world desperate for it. They miss his presence on screen, the calm assurance of his voice, and the quiet intensity with which he tackled each obstacle. But they understand, too, that Marty never belonged to the spotlight. He belonged to the wild. He was not performing a role. He was living a truth. And while the world moves faster and grows noisier, Marty Meierotto's story will remain a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary lives are lived far away from the cameras, where snow falls heavy, the wolves still howl, and a man's worth is measured not by what he shows the world, but by what he leaves behind when no one is watching.